Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast, presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in.
Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast. I'm Craig Jeffery. I'm your host for this episode. This episode is on the 2026 Outlook, and I'm joined by Craig Callé from Source Callé. Craig, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here.
Awesome. So the first question I have is, what are the top three trends or predictions, developments, or things that you think we should be watchful of in 2026? It could be from any one of those categories, or it could be all separate.
Sure. And I'm going to start with two letters that are so unfamiliar to everybody today, AI. And really what I can do is try to put AI in the context of my daily life and engagement with customers and prospects. And so what AI is affecting is the need to raise the bar from a security awareness training program standpoint. We've grown up with the tutorials that you're obliged to watch, and sometimes you get a little exam afterwards. I mean, the tactics that are being used today with AI are just requiring companies in that category to raise the bar dramatically. And so, for example, you'll have a deep fake video that you're tempted to react to, and the system will keep track of how easy it is to dupe you and to give you more simulations if needed, just to make sure that you're abreast of what the worst hackers can do with this new AI technology. So that's a good news story, that we don't have to fall victim, but it's a long way of saying the old tools just aren't going to cut it, and it's time for new tools. Several have popped up in just the last couple of years, names like Adaptive Security, Dune Security, Fable Security. And, one of the things I find ironic is that Adaptive, which got its initial funding from OpenAI, a name I think most of your audience would know, sort of the godfather of AI today, have funded Adaptive, which is essentially guarding people against the very tactics that their initial funder developed, right? So if I can create deep fakes, we need to find a way to help companies defend against the use of deep fakes. So that sort of brings the world full circle there. Little cynical, I suppose, to point that out, but it is definitely ironic and interesting. Who better to help you fend off the attacker than the person that can create the tools for the attacker in the first place?
Like selling arms to both sides in a war, right?
Exactly. A second issue is what I would call what's old is new again. And this, again, is in the theme of AI, in that my first channel partnership was with a company called Netscope that 15 years ago came out with a great idea. With everyone increasingly using cloud-based apps or hosts, leading to something called shadow IT, there was a need to govern the use of that activity. And similarly, I think most companies now realize that they need to have some kind of AI governance framework. I think we're still pretty early days there, but Netscope now uses sort of the similar approach to tackle shadow AI as opposed to shadow IT. And that's at least giving companies a centralized view of the kind of the use of AI within the organization, so that they can see where they need to pay attention, where they need to coach users to different behavior. I mean, for example, banks pretty much take the view, we don't want any AI in our organization. And so, like the early days of using SaaS apps, oftentimes companies, even in lockdown, so seemingly lockdown environments, the use of these tools is much more prevalent than CIOs and others even realize. So again, I think that's a good news story, and that AI is not going to go away, but we definitely need better ways to govern and manage it responsibly, and that there are tools that you can use to do just that. I guess the third thing I would focus on is regulation. I mean, let's face it, we're living in a world where DC is clearly biased against regulation. So let's deregulate this, let's deregulate that. Interestingly, they have said recently in the last week or so that we'll have one federal set of regulations for AI, as opposed to the states inventing their own approach to AI regulation. I don't know what that means. It could mean we don't want it regulated nationally, and let's not have the states come up with their own regulations. Certainly, there's efficiency in having one standard, but makes you wonder about privacy. And we've obviously gone the opposite way there. We have a patchwork of state level regulations governing privacy rights in this country. Should that be federalized as well? I don't see any evidence of that. I mean, again, you can be cynical and say, well, who are the AI godfathers? I can put them around a dinner table. You can't really do that in the privacy world, meaning you're addressing digital media, which is a large crowd with not a small number of participants that you can work with. Again, I'm sort of veering from the technology and the technology world to the political world, I suppose. But you can't divorce the two ultimately in terms of trying to figure out what it means to me as a treasurer or otherwise. So I guess I would just point out that dichotomy between AI and privacy, one with a clear desire to take one approach at the federal level while leaving another important area like privacy to the states altogether.
Interesting. Okay. So those are your three trends. That was excellent. Could you say your name, what you do at your company, say what your company is, and give us the website address for it?
Great. Well, thanks for the opportunity. Craig Callé. I've been building Source Callé LLC for over 11 years now. We're based in Philadelphia, have customers all across the United States. And we are advisors and resellers of best of breed technology in the cybersecurity, GRC, and privacy categories. Website's www.sourcecalle.com.
SOURCECALLE.com.
Perfect.
Excellent. Here's the last question, Craig. What recommendation or piece of advice do you have for corporate treasurers that's the most relevant at the start of 2026?
Well, as you know from past podcasts that we've done together, third-party risk management is near and dear to my heart. And in the course of doing that, I've gained a lot of experience about what's getting focused and what isn't. And frankly, from a treasurer standpoint, counterparties represent a huge risk. They almost never end up in a third-party risk manager's list of key parties to worry about. Meaning we're still in a world where companies are understaffed and underfunded to do third-party risk adequately. And so they're struggling just to keep up with conventional third parties that you might think of, like suppliers and vendors. And the risk has traditionally been heaviest, if not exclusively, focused on cybersecurity risk. So just having the treasurers connect with the parties that are running third-party risk in their organization, be it in GRC, be it in the CISO's office, wherever, is an important first step. But getting the focus beyond that to financial and other risks is just as important. In fact, I got involved in this business 20 years ago when one of our Asian suppliers went bankrupt. And at Gateway, we couldn't get as many PCs on Best Buy shelves that fall as a result. So we organized a third-party risk management program, but pretty much exclusively focused on financial risk. That doesn't exist really today. It's been all about cybersecurity, which is a good thing, but it needs to cover more risks. I think treasurers can play an important role in connecting the third parties they deal with more securely to the people who are supposed to be managing this risk at their company.
So is it third-party risk management mainly on the IT side, or are you defining that broadly?
I think it's universally viewed as part of governance, risk, and compliance, or GRC. From a practical standpoint, the risk that has bitten so many companies is a cybersecurity risk, a third party getting blown up because they got hacked. And so you'll find in a lot of companies today, CISOs are responsible for third party risk. And as a result, the focus, not surprisingly, is on cyber risk, and really almost never are they covering things like financial risk. Maybe in procurement, you have people reaching out to try to ensure compliance with sanctions and the like, but it's sort of a fragmented approach that needs to be consolidated. I know we don't have time in this broadcast to get into it, but I sort of advocate the development of a role that I call chief third party officer, that would sit on both on top of the GRC elements dealing with third-party risk as well as procurement and supply chain, and to focus on third parties in an organization as effectively as HR deals with the internal parties, employees and job candidates. There's a duality there. So that's sort of where I see things going in the long run in terms of creating an effective organizational structure to deal with these risks, but also to drive better performance from the third parties as well.
So, Craig, that would be the CTPO, Chief Third Party Officer. That sounds reasonable and needed. And I know we spoke about that before. So, thanks for your consistency. Thanks also for your recommendations, your watch list, and for joining me on the Treasury Update podcast.
Glad to be here. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
I'm here with Paul Galloway, and let me begin, Paul, by asking you the first of two questions. One is, what do you see as the top 3 trends, predictions, or developments you expect in 2026? Or, and it could be a combination of 3 things to be watchful or concerned about. So you've got 3 things. Feel free to go.
Yeah, I've got 3 things on my mind. First is the Genius Act. The second is fraud. And the last one is around the global economy. So I'll start with the Genius Act, legislation that was passed in July of this year. It's a regulatory framework for regulating stablecoins, which defines them as payment tokens. And so it creates licensing and capital rules for issuers of stablecoins, provides better consumer protection, require reserves to back them. It's pegged to the US dollar. These assets need to be highly liquid and secure. They have to comply, the issuers of stablecoins, they have to comply with AML and the Bank Secrecy Act. It also provides a priority to stablecoin holders in the event of bankruptcy. And you think about, why is all this important? I think it's important because corporations have been sitting on the sidelines going, hey, how are we ever going to use these types of payments? And this framework really takes away some of those issues that they were dealing with in terms of actually ever consider, using a stable coin for payments or receipts. And so now this makes it more appealing, I think, for corporations to engage in payments or receipts of stable coins. There is an oversight, it's an oversight of the cryptocurrency. It will help manage risk, provides capital and liquidity. Just a couple highlights from our recent survey that we had on the Genius Act. It's really, I think this particular podcast, I think it's really important to me, and that's why I put it first, is to get people to understand what the act is, because the awareness of the act is pretty limited. Then you think about just the optimism that's been growing for digital assets. We're seeing an increase in that optimism. People are starting to buy into that, hey, this isn't going away. I can remember when Bitcoin and Doge and others came out and people were like, yeah, I don't know. I'm going to touch this kind of stuff. Stable coins are different than Bitcoin. And I think with this act, it provides the stability, which is creating the optimism for the use of these particular digital assets. The technology priorities, they also extend beyond the assets. And so the respondents that we had, the interests were around AI and API capabilities ahead of digital assets. So I think the priorities with this act, I think it's going to bring people to a level where prioritization of this particular, the use of stablecoins, I think has become more prevalent. And so I expect that, banks and fintechs are going to come up to speed, which is going to allow corporates to jump into the realm of using stablecoins. So that was number 1 on my list. The second area is fraud. And, in particular, when we think about technology, AI in particular, fraudsters have access to tools to create fraud, which is getting harder to detect. They have tools like Fraud GPT, Worm GPT, jailbroken chatbots are growing, and it's creating more challenges for treasury teams or teams that effectuate payments to detect the fraud. So I think having the right tools in place to deal with this is going to be really important. One of the other things on my list was around the economy. From a global perspective, we're seeing a lot of disruption, whether it's wars, it's geopolitical spats, it's tariffs, war against drugs in the Gulf near our home. So there's lots of uncertainty out there. We've also seen that just here in the U.S., there's been some challenges around our own economy. The Fed is also, in their recent rate decision, there was some dissension. So there's some uncertainty around what the Fed actions are going to be. So when we come into 2026, if we see a lot of continued inflation where the economy remains frothy, I think treasurers need to be prepared for what actions the Fed might take. If we see a downturn in growth, that is also the flip side. So I think we're probably going into 2026. It's maybe a 50-50 chance of either the economy continues to boom or we see a downturn. There's a lot of uncertainty around that. So I think treasurers need to be prepared and engage in scenario analysis for upside and downside, and have a plan in place in terms of what actions they're going to take as things change in 2026. So those are kind of some of the highlights of what I see.
I know I'm not supposed to have a follow-up on that, but the 50-50 downturn, are you saying going from roughly 3% to 2%? Are you saying to 1%? Are you saying flat or negative when you say that?
It could be 1% or lower on the downside.
Can you say your name and your company and the website that the listeners can connect with you on?
Paul Galloway, Senior Advisor at Strategic Treasurer. You can find out more information about our organization, listen to this podcast or other podcasts at strategictreasurer.com.
Paul, thanks for the link and the 3 trends or issues that are coming up. What is your top recommendation or piece of advice you have for corporate treasurers at the start of this year, 2026?
Treasurers need to pay attention to what's going on in the economy. I think the economic factors that are out there are super important today going into 2026. In particular, think about maybe there's overpricing out there, and in particular the AI boom that's occurred. There's a lot of leverage that's been used to expand that market. You got to wonder, are these organizations overvalued? Is there a chance that we could have something like the dot-com bubble in the early 2000s where, the overpricing finally collapses and comes back down to maybe where it really is? We could see that with AI. I think treasurers need to be prepared for the potential of something that's a market disruption and not just a downturn in the economy itself. So I talked about fraud in our prior question in the sense of, that we could have an economic downturn. So I think the scenario analysis work that treasurers do and the plans that they do, they need to incorporate something like this, an AI bubble, and a downturn could occur. What do they have in place today to ensure that they have access to capital, that they have access to liquidity, that they have shored up their balance sheets and their relationships with their banks so that they could be prepared for anything that might be negative, in particular, a market disruption? I see that as probably the biggest potential risk out there with AI in 2026.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Paul. Really appreciate your input in this series on the 2026 outlook.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Craig. I always enjoy our discussions.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.